Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show. I am Dr. Duke, and I'm joined today by iHeartRadio talk show host and all-around Wisconsin celebrity, Vicki McKenna. We're going to try to do something a little bit different, Vicki. We're going to try to create a podcast that it'll happen occasionally, but we want to do something unique. Instead of politics and all the garbage that you usually get, we'd like to approach culture through the great works of Western culture. We want to bring you every podcast at least one book, one poem, one play, maybe even occasionally one movie, and use it as a window into our current situation today. Today, I'm really excited. We're going to bring you as our very first podcast, Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis. It is a science fiction book, one of three that Lewis wrote. This one was written in 1938. And it conforms to all the wonderful aspects of science fiction. It's a trip to Mars and the life that he finds there. But Lewis is doing something really interesting, Vicki. He's dealing with Christian science fiction, isn't he?
Yeah, first off, I think that you can get to all the ugly politics stuff. Actually, you can stumble into it through works of literature and sometimes film and sometimes. So I think Lewis actually can help us understand what's going on now, particularly with these three books. In the beginning, Out of a Silent Planet, I think what he's trying to do is, if you think about science fiction, it's always about this ugliness beyond Earth. It's always a monster or it's a great race that wants to destroy us, and it's something that you don't seek out. It's nothingness, or it's ugly, or it's vicious. And I think what he wanted to show is that beyond Earth, the heavens, is not something that is empty or devoid of meaning or devoid of joy or devoid of beauty. It's something that should be considered differently than the modern science fiction writers typically consider, and that is that it's something glorious and something to seek out. And that's where I think we begin the trilogy with Out of a Silent Planet, him thinking he's going into the great nothingness. He's going into obliteration, when in fact he finds the heavens.
Yeah, we've got our main character is Elwyn Ransom, a English professor, believe it or not, from Cambridge University, who finds himself kidnapped by some evil men with bad intentions who have created a spaceship. And when Ransom finds himself kidnapped and brought along, as he's soaring through the heavens, everything he thought he knew about space from scientific perspectives was wrong. It's not cold and sterile and empty. In fact, as a writer of Christian science fiction, Lewis was really bothered by the fact that reading the original science fiction from people like H.G. Wells was a socialist. Most of the first science fiction writers were socialists. And under the socialist imagination in the late 19th century, the heavens, as you just said, were where the evil came from. Earth was somehow innocent. And as a Christian, Lewis realized, no, it's the earth that's the problem. Right. The heavens are innocent.
And if the heavens are nothing but dark, vacant coldness, then where's God? Where's there room for God? And there's no room for God unless it's each and every one of us is our own gods. Isn't that curious how that works so nicely with socialism? Where in order to be socialist, purely socialist, first thing you got to do is you've got to get rid of God. That's pretty easy to get rid of God in a story if you just simply render the heavens dark and ugly and cold and menacing.
And oppositional to human life.
And oppositional to Earth and human life, exactly. So, in fact, learning that, it makes to understand that it makes the space trilogy a little bit more meaningful, simply because there is a bit of social commentary, given that this was a counterbalance to some of the more popular science fiction. Science fiction was becoming, or scientific fiction, I think is what he called it, is becoming very popular at the time. And he wanted to show that I don't think he wanted to let culture get too far along thinking there was nothing beyond the great glory of Earth. Because that's too seductive. That gets us too close to collective atheism.
And you think about science fiction 70, 80 years later, when you think about Star Trek or Star Wars, in Star Wars you have the Force, which is the closest you get to God. But I remember watching Star Trek as a kid, and the human beings on the Enterprise were the highest form of, and the Vulcans, right? Pure rationality. And if you think about horror movies that deal with aliens, think about Predator or Alien or Independence Day, still to this day, the Earth is all there really is, and all of these hostile cultures want to come here and destroy us. Lewis understood that from a Christian perspective, and he wanted to write this Christian science fiction, that from our theology we know the Earth is a fallen planet. That's why it's called the Silent Planet. The Silent Planet in the book, this first of the trilogy, really means Earth. Right? Though his word for Mars is Malacandra. But we are the silent planet because we're the only planet in the solar system, Lewis imagines, that has succumbed to sin, Original sin betrayed God, Adam and Eve, the fall, war, death, murder that has ensued for thousands of years. The other planets on which life is sustained, Mars and Venus, they're pristine. The creatures on those planets have not fallen. And so the whole rest of the universe is in cosmic harmony with the God who made it, except for us.
That's the point.
And who's in charge of the earth, according to Lewis?
Well, the bent angel,
bent one.
also known as Satan.
That's right.
Of course, now we have an opportunity to redeem ourselves throughout the course of these stories. You're shown a pathway to understanding how to reject this sort of self-worship. I think self-worship actually is what he gets at a lot, and I'm not sure he does this explicitly or directly, but as I was reading the book, it struck me that we became fallen when we became hyper-materialistic, and I'm talking about materialism as a philosophy, not necessarily materialism as a behavior.
A bad character trait.
The idea that we can conquer all physical matter. And remember, at the time he's writing this, we're coming up on understanding of physics, a better understanding of the cosmos, a better understanding of our solar system, the way planets are formed, coming up on the discovery of how to make an atomic weapon, and so. Materialism is this idea that we can just simply try to find a way to harness nature to our own benefit. I mean, at that time, to be writing a story that said, we're kind of the bad guys here. We're the ones that are sinful, that are sort of existing in a state of sin. At the time, people did have an idea that we would go and conquer planets, and we would go and colonize planets, and we would destroy what was ever there to turn it into a mini version of us or an expanded version of us. And if you and I have talked about this before, and now you have modern transhumanists who are thinking the exact same thing. We have to find a way to continue to replicate the exact material universe that we have been determined to conquer for so long without any idea of God whatsoever. I think Lewis wanted to make sure that culture didn't go sideways, and wanted to make sure we still had a concept that there was a heaven, there was a God, and that we were not the end-all, be-all.
That's right. This. And Stephen Hawking, before he died, said effectively the same thing, that human beings are going to have to get to the point where they reject what he called the fairy tale of religion and begin to colonize other planets so that biological life can survive.
Think about that. I think he recognized the danger where that leads us, and the modern transhumanists now are thoroughly atheistic, are willing to use humans as a commodity, are not willing to consider that that we are essentially choosing enslavement for ourselves. I think he saw this 80 years ahead of time.
To expand on what you say about materialism, it's not just harnessing nature. It is this belief that terrified Lewis that all there is nature. There is no God, no heaven, no soul, no immortality. There are no angels. There's just material matter. And what Lewis is quick to want to point out is that that's a very narrow way of viewing reality. And so as soon as Ransom, this English professor, is kidnapped by these men and carried into space, he begins to find that as he's traveling in the spaceship, that all the fears, that the mythology of science, right, that have made him believe that we're the only creatures in the whole universe.
Or the fairy tale of materialism.
Materialism, yeah. And so you had mentioned that clip. Throw that up there. Let's read this clip, and I'm going to read it out loud, and you comment on this, Vicki. As he's in the ship, Ransom, right? But Ransom, as time wore on, became aware of another and more spiritual cause for his progressive lightening and exaltation of heart, a nightmare long engendered in the modern mind by the mythology that follows in the wake of science, was falling off him. He had read of space. At the back of his thinking for years had lurked the dismal fancy of the black, cold vacuity, the utter deadness which was supposed to separate the worlds. He had not known how much this affected him until now that the very name space seemed a blasphemous libel for this Empyrean ocean of radiance in which they swam.
The modern mind and the mythology that follows from the world of science. So he's essentially what Stephen Hawking said, the fairy tale of religion. C.S. Lewis is saying the fairy tale of the mythology.
That's
that we have to create it. The more we know about the material world, the more we know about nature, the more enticed we are to create a mythology. And if that mythology doesn't include God, then it becomes ugly. It becomes... suddenly you can see why people would see space as dark and black and vacuous.
Because we're everything.
Exactly. And why anything else beyond us is going to be a menace. It's going to be a threat. to the survival of our species. And of course, we have to do everything in our power to stop that.
Stop it. And how many times have you and I talked about this? As God recedes from modern culture, as progressive thinking, materialist thinking begins to remove God, we don't get rid of mythology. We just start mythologizing materialism. How many times have you and I discussed on your program how the global warming cult is a mythology, right? The idea that a very few percentage-wise climate scientists who are trying to struggle to understand what's going on have been completely eclipsed by sociologists and politicians and lawyers and activists who have turned the Earth into Gaia, the Earth Mother,
True.
right? And she's all we have. Right, that in the same materialistic
and she is
focus,
all that matters.
She's all that matters.
So, isn't it interesting that you would think this sort of radical humanism, that this sort of transgressive humanism that we have seen come upon us in the last, say, 40 or 50 years, where it's all the almighty self, and we are worshiping ourselves in the Gaia, sort of the Gaia mythology, the global warming cult. You have humans are utterly irrelevant. The only thing
we're the sinners in this new religion.
Isn't it true?
The Earth
and
was
we have to be eradicated.
Yep.
We are the virus. You've heard this in science fiction movies. You've seen this in stories. We're the virus that must be eradicated from this perfect planet.
Was a perfect garden. Until the disease of man came. Right. And now it's a war between environmental sinners and saints, the damned and the saved.
Yes.
And we know how the Bible ended. That mythology, it ended with the apocalypse. What are global warming alarmists predicting is going to happen if man is allowed to keep sinning? Yeah, that's right.
Right? The apocalypse.
Yeah.
Raising ocean levels, melting polar ice caps, scorching heat.
And think about the soaring rhetoric of a self-imposed narcissistic Obama who says, the moment you elected me, I will lower sea levels.
Think about the narcissism, the pure cultural narcissism that says we, by a few bureaucratic policy changes, can save the planet.
And
we can save. Now, mind you, save the planet. Isn't this curious? Because their mythology gets turned on its head. You've got the great Gaia myth, and this is the only thing that matters. It's the perfect garden. Well, this is their God. Their God. The God then is nature. And so how do we save the God, Duke?
Well,
we are the God.
And the other question is,
in this scenario,
what kind of a God is it if we human beings can so easily destroy her? Go to that second quote.
And save her.
Go to that second quote where he continues to talk about his experience in space. It's not dead. The heavens aren't dead and hostile. Compared to the murderous regime of human life on this planet, he continued to reflect in space. He says he could not call it dead. He felt life pouring into him from it every moment. How indeed should it be otherwise, since out of this ocean all the worlds and all their life had come? He had thought it barren. He now saw that it was the womb of worlds, whose blazing and innumerable offspring, the stars, looked down nightly, even upon the earth, with so many eyes, and here with how many more? No. Space was the wrong name. Older thinkers, the classicists, right? From Aristotle all the way on down, older thinkers had been wiser when they named it simply the heavens.
The heavens. So that we understand, again, that there is something much greater, much more powerful, much more, mystical. It actually, it encourages you to think of mystical things if you think of something beyond Earth. And not something as mundane as everyday nature. And I don't mean to dismiss nature. I love nature as much as the next person, but not to the point of worshiping it as if it is the end-all, be-all. Now C.S. Lewis is saying there's much more, and it's glorious, and it's beautiful. And this is where the angels live. The angels aren't here. The angels are in the heavens.
Well, think about it.
And Malacandra was
Mars.
in Mars, in the heavens. You go to Mars, and you're thinking it's going to be this bleak place, and it's this wonderful place with this beautiful culture and these charming and kind animals that have consciousness.
Unfallen creatures who don't hate, don't kill each other.
No, everything is done for the purposes that it needs to be done, not for personal glory or pride or vanity or any of the things that we here on the silent planet have held up as some kind of great goal for ourselves.
And think about the gap, right? If there is a God, and that God is beyond the heavens, then why would we think the huge gap between God and us is just dead? As if God could not come up with a better plan for empty space. Go a little bit further in our quotes, Mike. And so when he gets to Mars, one of the creatures he encounters are the Sorns, right? And they are long and thin creatures, highly, highly intelligent. And they're very interested to find out more about what life was like on the silent planet. Their planet did not succumb to sin and temptation. They still have an angel. A word they used was Oyarsa. The Oyarsa of Mars was the angel God put in charge of the creatures on Mars. There is still a connection directly from God to the angel regent, to the people on the planet. The Sorns, when they meet Ransom, and a dweller from the Thulkandra, right, the silent planet, they want to know about it. They can talk to all the other angels in charge of all the other planets, but no one's spoken to Earth in thousands of years since the bent angel took it over. So here's the Sorns, right, grilling Ransom on what Earth is like. The Sorns work systematically from the geology of Earth to its present geography, and thence, in turn, to flora, fauna, human history, languages, politics, and the arts. When they found that Ransom could tell them no more on any given subject, and this happened pretty soon in most of their inquiries, they dropped it at once and went on to the next. They were astonished at what he had to tell them of human history. War, slavery, and prostitution. Imagine being Elwyn Ransom of Cambridge University, and these wonderfully brilliant creatures of a foreign planet are asking you about the behavior of our planet's inhabitants. It was all one. It was perfectly fine for Ransom when he was discussing flora and fauna, but what happens when he has to tell the history of the human race?
He's now accounting for the sins of human history in front of creatures that do not comprehend it, can't comprehend choosing. Remember, all of this at the end of these 3 books, everything is about free will, ultimately becomes about free will, but can't fathom choosing death, choosing war, choosing slavery, and that this is what we did. He's now, I mean, he's being asked to account for Earth, and he himself finds he's starting to understand what the bent one means, what is controlling Earth, why Earth has been silent.
And you see how narcissistic human beings are. It is, God or no God, it is undeniably clear that the history of all human cultures and all human races and all human nations has been violence and war and tyranny and oppression. I'm sorry to break it to you, liberals. It's not just Western culture that colonized. It's not just Western culture that took slaves. We are, even if you don't believe in God, it's impossible. Can you imagine a Martian hovering over our planet? One of the very first things that Martian would think of when he looked at us was, gee, everything on this planet is killing and eating each other.
They hate each other.
Everything that's going on this planet is ensconced in violence and separation. And so yet the science fiction, the dreamy utopian science fiction writers like Wells, who are all socialists, they want to argue that we're the perfect world.
Exactly. And you think about, that's what materialism essentially is saying that this limited vantage that you have, this is all there is. This is it. This is the end all be all. Nothing is greater than this. Nothing is greater than the fallen man, the poor choices we have made that have resulted in tens and tens and tens of millions of death, how many miles and miles of destruction, war, slavery. I mean, we're supposed to be what is the end all be all, and what we're supposed to glory ourselves, and yet that's what the modern thinkers want young people to believe and want everybody to believe.
And think about it. That's what the socialist H.G. Wells did. He looked around our fallen world
great.
And projected his own cultural prejudices on the heavens. Any creatures that must come from a foreign planet would have to be worse than we are, have to be viciouser than we are.
Because if they're not, then you have to account for why we're the worst. And if you have to account for why we're the worst, you have to go beyond the materialist box.
That's right.
You do.
Simple Marxism won't work.
It sure doesn't, because you got rid of God, and God answers the why. Why have we chosen to be this way?
Why have we devolved? Well, the one good answer is...
actually, why have we devolved actually ultimately becomes because we have chosen.
We chose to walk away from the order of God's creation. Give us a little more, Mike. Let's delve a little deeper into Out of the Silent Planet. When the Sorns are talking, they're discussing these wonderfully, almost like, imagine Mr. Spock, but cuddly and friendly, right? Very rational, very friendly. And as they're discussing amongst themselves what Ransom has just told them about the violence, the prostitution, and all of that stuff of the earth, one of the Sorns says, it is because they have no Oyarsa, said one of the Sorns. They rejected God, and therefore they rejected the direct link to God that are these angels who oversee the planets. Ours has been taken by the dark angel, the bent one. Another Sorn says, no, It is because every one of them now in their materialism wants to be a little Oyarsa himself. Talk about, that's exactly what you just said. Follow up on that, Vicki.
Yeah, in fact, if you go a little bit further, beasts must be ruled by now by Oyarsa. Beasts can't rule themselves. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to rule and I don't, it actually sounds too mundane. It sounds too temporal. We literally want to have the powers of God.
Right.
We literally, not figuratively, literally want to have these great powers, and we have imagined that this is something possible. We have imagined that we can somehow perfect ourselves without having the great, glorious power of God there. And when you've shut out God and you've allowed yourself to essentially, and again, the Silent Planet is ruled by the devil. You've allowed yourself to essentially honor your individuals who are completely corrupted by Satan as somehow worthy of worship that's just a disaster. That's what ultimately has led us to this sort of soullessness that we have
narcissism.
and narcissism in modern politics. And I think that also it's how we've gotten to this transgressive individualism that we see right now. Again, you have everybody wanting themselves glorified as an individual god. I am special, you are special, we are all special. Well, if everybody is special, nobody is special. So it necessarily, I think, follows from this idea that we began by thinking God didn't matter. I mean, God's a silly fairy tale, right? God's a silly fairy tale. We're all that's it. Ruled by Satan, but we don't accept Satan. We reject Satan. So we suddenly begin to honor ourselves. Imagine what happens when you start to do that: war, death, destruction, and ultimately, when we're so self-satisfied. Now we've got to turn to ourselves and say, okay, now I'm done honoring us. Now it's time to honor me.
Honor me. And think about what you just said about science and technology. They're promising us extended lives. They're striving for the possibility of endless human life.
Yeah, we have a slide on that.
We'll get to that right now. Where human beings can upload their consciousness, right? No one dies. The eradication of diseases. It's a fairy tale. It's a Marxist utopian dream, isn't it? But Lewis
isn't
talks
it? Because
about
it takes conscience. It takes consciousness and conscience out of the equation entirely.
Just life for the sake of life endlessly. Go back to the slide, Mike. If you look at the last line of this, the Soren says, us, we, people like the earth on earth, they are like one trying to lift himself by his own hair, lift himself into the air, or one trying to see over a whole country when he is on level ground with it, or like a female trying to beget young by herself. By cutting ourselves off from the creative forces of the universe, starting with God and working all the way down, we are ultimately narcissistic, we are ultimately self-justifying. Go to the next slide, and I want you to comment on this one. The Oyarsa at the end of the book, he brings ransom and he brings the two kidnappers. One is a world-renowned physicist by the name of Weston. Even his name Weston suggests men of the West, right? The scientific revolution and all of the cultural arrogance and mythology that comes in the wake of it. The Oyarsa says to the physicist, "The weakest of my people does not fear death. It is the bent one, the Lord of your world, who wastes your lives and befouls them with flying from what you know will overtake you in the end. If you were the subjects of God, you would know peace."
Yeah, I like the last part as well. He would have made them as your people are now wise enough to see the death of their kind approaching, but not wise enough to endure it. And I think we may be right on the edge of crossing over that line where people just simply refuse to endure death itself. Because at the end of the day, it's very, very empty. When you have taken God out of the picture, when you have decided that we are God, when then you have decided individually that you have to be worshipped as a little deity yourself, you will respect my decision, you will honor my choice. If I'm a man, you have to call me exactly
right. Biology doesn't matter.
Exactly. I am whatever I have created myself to be. But what happens at death? Nothingness. Because that's where you are. That's nothingness. Right. If nothingness is the end,
then we must live forever.
Then you have to live forever, right. Because otherwise you cannot endure.
If there is no heaven to get to from earth.
By the way, the other extreme of that is you kill yourself.
Right.
There's no
nihilism.
reason. Exactly. You've got nihilism. Absolutely. Or you've got this crazy obsessive narcissism.
That's right.
And it doesn't lead to any place that I think is ultimately going to be a solid ground for a society.
And it's very wise what you said, that if there is no transcendence, if there is nothing beyond our material life and death, then death is terrifying. If, however, there is a God and a benevolent God, and there is a place where God is, then death is not the end. It's the beginning of a higher reality. And so people who believe in God, Lewis is suggesting seriously, they don't make a God of this world, and they certainly don't make a God of themselves. Right? But without the idea of God, it's all you have. And so this strive for never-ending youth, never-ending beauty, the endless plastic surgery, the endless drugs to make us feel and act younger, everything from Viagra to the myriad opioids we do. And we're the richest country in the history of the world, and we take more tranquilizers and antidepressants than all the other countries combined.
I thought it was such a wonderful place, right? This
exactly.
is this great place.
Why are you so sinking depressed?
It shouldn't be depressing at all. Everybody should be happy. But if you've got nihilists who are saying this material world is pretty ugly.
And it's everything.
I don't want to be any part of it any longer. Or this material world is ugly and it's everything and I want to live in it forever. I never want to step aside and see what's on the other side. It's just, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it walks us straight into collectivism. I really do. I mean, in terms of just the way a society is going to be organized. I mean, metaphysically, I don't know what happens to the human race, but societally, it's a necessary prerequisite to have a Western culture like ours embrace collectivism in a way that would make Orwell seem like he was, just having a bad day.
And it's not even just biblical mythology. The Greeks and Romans knew this too. There's the great myth of Aurora and Tithonus. Aurora was the goddess of the dawn and immortal, and she fell in love with a human man, Tithonus. And so the love of the human and the divine, they married and it was wonderful. But the one thing Aurora forgot to ask the gods for was eternal youth for her husband. So she remains young and eternal because she's not human. But he keeps getting older and older and older and more decrepit. And it's a great warning from the Greeks that nothing in the human realm stays. And you could even link a human being to a radiant angel, and you're not going to get past the humanity. Throw up the next slide, Mike. Take a look at this. As Weston tries to protest and insist upon biology and chemistry and all the great ways that physics is going to help him conquer the universe, the angel says, "Be silent," said the voice of the Oyarsa. "You, thick one, you have told me nothing of yourself, so I will tell it to you. In your own world, you have attained great wisdom concerning bodies, physics. And by this you have been able to make a spaceship that can cross the heavens. But in all other things, you have the mind of an animal. Because you thought I meant evil to you, you went as a beast goes against a beast of some other kind, and you kidnapped this ransom. You would have given him up to the evil you feared." And Vicki, talk about what happens when you take the scientific method and scientific ambition and divorce it from morality and divorce it from metaphysics and make unto it a god itself. It becomes murderous.
It becomes tyrannical. It becomes, well, we've seen it play out in history when you have decided that power for power's end, and in this case, the pursuit of life itself for its own end. I mean, ultimately, everything has to succumb to that. Everything has to be subsumed by that goal. If it's your power and that's your goal because you have decided that force and essentially sort of psychological colonialism is what's required of you, there is nothing that will get in the way of someone's pursuit of their own power or a movement's pursuit of its own power. Not murder, not genocide, not psychological enslavement. Nothing. Nothing is not justifiable when you've divorced science from morality.
How many environmentalists are calling metaphorically for a plague to lower the human population all over the place? Think about in the last 120 years, since 1900, how far science has brought us. It's amazing. And yet people don't want to acknowledge the fact that science, too, has played a leading role in creating the technology and the scientific weaponry to allow us to also kill more people in the last 120 years.
And on a micro level and on a macro level. It is science right now that is warehousing germs.
That's biological warfare.
That could destroy a planet.
Chemical warfare.
Science that created the A-bomb. It was
first thing we did when we split the atom.
Indeed.
Right.
Yeah, so you also think about how we are already justifying all manner of immorality because we have divorced science and culture as best as common culture can do so from God. You have a justification for third trimester abortion. You have a justification for infanticide.
Voluntary euthanization.
You have embryos that are frozen right now, and there are people who argue they should be experimented upon. You have selective abortion because someone's had in vitro fertilization, and there's 8 embryos, and you only want 2. And so we've actually already decided that we are God enough to be able to make these decisions
and determine life and death.
Now, how many people consider most of that controversial? I do.
I do.
Many people do. Most people don't think about it. Those who are forced to think about it would prefer not to. And I think many, many people, I would even argue the majority, don't think about it enough to care.
No,
and so we're already here.
And in 1948, immediately after World War II and the dropping of the atomic bombs, General Omar Bradley, the great warrior, gave a speech at a university, and he said, "Ours is a world of nuclear giants and ethical infants. We have conquered the mystery of the atom, but we have forgotten the Sermon on the Mount." Go to the next slide, Mike. The Oyarsa talking about ransom again, and how Weston in his scientific zeal to colonize would have gladly killed Weston or hundreds of ransom if that was the price to pay for the survival of biology. The Oyarsa says, "Today, seeing ransom here, to save your own life, you would have given him to me a second time, still thinking that I meant him hurt. These are your dealings, Weston, with your own kind. And what you intend to my people, I know. Already you have killed some, and you have come here to kill them all. To you, it is nothing whether a creature is human or not."
What's the difference between humanity and animals?
Right.
I can't, to a materialist, what is the difference except that
we
you're
are
more powerful?
Animals. We're more evolved animals.
You can walk upright and you have opposable thumbs, but beyond that, what is the difference? Is there any difference between? And you know what? The radical environmentalists will say there's none. Peter Singer will argue that a pig has more of a right to exist, or a river has more of a right to exist than a disabled human infant. So that's where this leads. This question leads to, if there's no God, if there's nothing that makes humanity special, not our conscience, not our morality, if nothing makes us unique and nothing makes us special, we are the accidents of random chance that allowed us to walk upright, have large brains, and opposable thumbs, then at some point, if there are weaker among us, why can't we be called? Why can't we have fewer rights than animals or fewer rights than trees?
If we are just animals, we cull all the other animal species. The sick, the weak, the old have to be culled. Right. And that was exactly what Hitler thought. Right?
It's exactly what Hitler
we're
thought.
Doing with Down syndrome babies, trying to abort them all away. Was it last year? Iceland, the little country of Iceland, boasted that there wasn't a single Down syndrome baby born in the entire country.
But they said they'd eradicated 98% of Down syndrome
by simply aborting them.
Nobody was actually going to that sub-headline.
It's genocide.
It was genocide.
I've been around Down syndrome people. They have a right to life. In some ways, they have more of a right to life than I do. They tend to be more happy than I am. They're more content with themselves. But according to modern science, if we're doing the world a favor by finding them in the womb and killing them. Go to the next slide. This is where the Oyarsa are reflecting on this kind of human arrogance and the way that science can justify killing in the name of the idea, right? Utilitarianism. At first, the angel says, "At first I thought this was because, Weston, you cared only whether a creature had a body like your own. But Ransom has a body like yours, and you would kill him as lightly as you would kill any of my creatures. I did not know that the bent one had done so much in your world, and I still do not understand it. If you belong to me and not the devil, if you belong to us, and you were one of my creatures, I would unbody you even now. Do not think foolishness. By my hand, God does greater things than this, and I can unmake you even on the borders of your own world's air, but I do not yet resolve to do this. It is for you to speak now. Let me see, Weston, man of science, if there is anything in your mind besides fear and death and desire."
And there isn't. But Ransom chooses the second chance for him.
Look at the 3 things.
Yes.
That to become completely godless and to be completely consumed by making mortal human beings immortal, fear, death, and desire is all that's in your head. Fear of death, the consequences of death that must be overcome by men, and then the desire to be superhuman. All of this, by the way, you can get by submitting to the God of the Bible, right? That according to Lewis, the God who created us takes away our fears, And if our desire is for him, eternal life is possible, but not here. The cost of living here is death. We want to forestall all that. I think we've got one more slide left, Mike. No, I think we're actually done with slides now. Say a few words now. If you want to, the ideal will be if we can, when we have our next podcast, we'll do book 2. Out of the Silent Planet is book 1. Book 2, I think, is the masterpiece. It's Paralandra. It's what happens on Venus next. And then the final book is That Hideous Strength. When we meet again, we will do Paralandra. But give us a little teaser, Vicki. Give us a little sense of what people can look forward to if they get past the first book.
All right. Well, you'll get to the most plush, lyrical sentences you've ever read in your entire life, for one thing. But you will get to you'll get to Ransom attempting to forestall the temptation of an Eve-like character on Paralandra, which is Venus. And he will meet the devil again.
The bent one.
He will meet the bent one face to face in a very real and visceral way. And he will be asked to obey. But he will be asked to choose to obey. And so at the end, I think in Paralandra, free will is ultimately what becomes the sort of centralizing theme, is the importance of free will, because you can't be made to love, you can't be made to hate. You must choose these things, lest you just be a slave.
And Elwyn Ransom of Cambridge University is going to have to combat the devil to make sure the Eve of this brand new planet doesn't make the same tragic mistake we did.
Ours did.
We did. And I hope you enjoyed.
And he cannot lie to her.
And you cannot lie to her.
He cannot lie to her.
And I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Ideally, it'll be one of many. Give us your feedback either at the Dr. Duke Show. I know Vicki's going to post it on her networks. If you want to hear more of these kind of cultural moments, let us know. Again, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is Vicki McKenna. Thanks for listening.